The Bear Roars Special Edition series, Bandwidth, serves as a platform to celebrate the people and stories of Dan's book, Bandwidth, the Untold Story of Ambition, Deception, and Innovation that shaped the internet age and the dot-com boom. The story covers the epic journey of the creation of the internet backbones, the building of the early competitive fiber networks in the 1990s, the bandwidth boom, bust, and resurrection, ending in 2020 when Dan's company, Zayo, was sold. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble with a February 2025 release date. Head to dan-caruso.com/book for more details. In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Bill LaPerch, former CEO of AboveNet and a telecom veteran who's seen it all. Bill shares his journey from West Point to the battlefield of the business world, where he went from jumping out of helicopters in the 101st Airborne to navigating the cutthroat world of telecom. He talks about his time at MCI, witnessing firsthand the rise and fall of WorldCom, and how he steered AboveNet through bankruptcy to become a dominant force in metro fiber. Dan and Bill also break down the lessons learned from building and scaling networks, why dark fiber became a game changer, and how today's digital infrastructure landscape echoes the past. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
So, Bill, where are you right now?
Well, Dan, I'm speaking to you from the beach town of Montauk, New York, all the way out at the end of Long Island. It's a place that actually you're halfway responsible for. I bought it right after the AboveNet deal closed with Zayo, and been here about 11 years now, and enjoy about half my time out here.
And what's the environment like out there? You called it a kind of a surf area. I've never been out there.
It's a surfer's paradise. It's beyond the Hamptons. If anybody in Montauk says the Hamptons, they get thrown out of the place. This is not the Hamptons. This is way more laid back, way cooler than the Hamptons. And as I said, we've been enjoying it for about 12, 14 years now.
I think the only time I've been physically real close to that area, what big golf tournament gets played out there, or what golf course gets?
We went at Shinnecock.
Shinnecock.
Yeah, I actually played Shinnecock for the first time on June 13th. More correctly, it played me, but it was one thing anyway.
Yeah. No, I played Shinnecock once during the heyday with right before one of the tournaments with you knew Jason Rowe from
and
so played out there with them, and we're both equally bad golfers, so we had a good old time.
You stand on the first tee, man. You see about 10 trees, and you say, "How hard can this be?" The first time you fall into the rough, you know how hard it could be.
Right. So there is so much for us to talk about, and I want to start with you and the service that you gave to our country, and tell us about that experience, kind of what led you down that path, what led you to leave, and then join us in the telecom world.
Sure. Well, just start at the beginning, Dan. I think you know this. I'm the oldest of 7 children. My dad was a New York City policeman.
Wow.
Interestingly, dinner conversations were quite interesting because my dad was detective lieutenant of Manhattan South Homicide, which for TV viewers know that as Kojak.
Oh, really?
It was. He was Kojak. So, yeah, a lot of fun times around the dinner table. Mom and dad were both very devout Catholics, so I attended Catholic school and grammar school, high school. Of course, I went to West Point and then the military. So as my wife likes to tell me, I really didn't have to dress myself till I was about 35. And sometimes she says that reflects itself in what I put on.
But everything had to have been well pressed before then.
Yeah, and matching too, hopefully. So. Anyway, I ended up in the military academy. It was a funny thing. I didn't spend my whole boyhood wanting to go there, but when I started the application process was so competitive that by the time I got in, I said, "Man, I better go here. This is a pretty good place," and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life.
Yeah, I briefly thought about going into the Air Force Academy. I even got a letter of reference and reached out to one of the centers, but I don't think I ever told my parents.
Yeah.
And so
we refer to that as the new academy. That's the new academy. That's only been around, 60 years versus 125 for Army and Navy.
Is there a Space Force one yet?
It's probably on the way. Not yet. I think you go through the Air Force Academy and get in the Space Force, but it's on the horizon, no doubt.
Yeah, because we have Space Forces down here in Colorado Springs along with the Air Force Academy. But Trump is saying he's going to move it if he gets into office down to, I don't know, Huntsville, I think, somewhere like that. So we'll see. But, and so what was your experience like in West Point, and what was your career like in the military?
So, West Point, Dan, no surprise to you, is ultra competitive. When you go to West Point, for example, as a freshman, you take math 6 days a week, you get graded every day, and every 6 weeks, you change around classes so that the guy to your right and left is just as smart as you. So, and you do that for an entire year of what they call plebe math. It's not a place with a lot of choices. Out of 4 years there, I had 3 electives. I got to choose between, thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, all sorts of exciting choices like that.
So how do you think that would go over with today's COVID generation, where they have to take math 6 days a week and be tested and expect to pass a test? How would that COVID do with that?
I think we know the answer to that one, Dan. I mean, listen, the academy has changed. It's changed with times. It's adopted. It's not the same place. I'm referred to as an old grad now, so I have the the luxury of criticizing and telling them that it wasn't as hard as what I went through. But the fact is, it's doing a great job training young leaders for today. So all good.
Yeah,
I graduated there, and to 2 interesting things. I spent most of my military career at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, at the 101st Airborne. So I had the opportunity to jump out of helicopters and rappel out of helicopters and shoot artillery. And, I don't regret one day in the military, Dan. I was around great people. I was around a great culture. 101st is a storied unit that has great history behind it. So I was very happy there as well. But as part of my military career, I also, when I was at West Point, took up a sport called team handball. Now, if you watched the Olympics recently, you saw handball being played on the TV, and everybody kept saying, "What's that game?" And the reason nobody knows about it in the U.S., which, by the way, was the reason I was probably pretty good at it, because nobody else was playing. But I graduated West Point, made the All-Army team, the national team, and actually lived in Colorado Springs for a year training for the 1980 Olympics.
Really? Was there 80 Olympics? Was that one that was?
So we qualified for the Olympics, and then the next day I was sitting next to Jimmy Carter as he announced that we weren't going to the Olympics.
Oh, man. When you say you're sitting next to him, what do you mean you're sitting next to him?
Well, I was the representative of the team handball team that was called to Washington, D.C. When he made the announcement, he wanted representatives from all the Olympic teams there.
Wow. And the reason for that, of course, was
Russians in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the reason was really, Dan, he was a Naval Academy grad and didn't know any better. I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah.
What would you expect from a Naval Academy grad?
What do you know? What do you know? So let's fast forward a bit and talk about the circumstances in which you ended up at WorldCom. You and I were at different points, slightly different points in time. We were each at WorldCom, each for short periods of time. And based on some conversations you and I had, experienced some similar things. So tell us what led to you being part of WorldCom, and then what you found when you got there.
Yeah. So, my career, had been, when I got in the military, I looked for the closest thing to the military I could find, which, by the way, is the phone company. So I spent about 8 years at New York Tel and actually got well trained in outside plant and how the telephone system works. I mean, for all its, shortcomings, the Bell system had a pretty good training system and was pretty good at training people. So
what years,
to my knowledge,
what years would that have been? Because those years might have paralleled mine at Illinois.
I think we did overlap. So I got out of the military in 82, and I spent 82 to 88 at New York Tel.
Okay, so I was probably 86 to, call it 90, somewhere in there. So similar duration of time.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. The training I received was, as part of a management development program, was really what prepared me for making the most out of my career. And ironically, you and I spent our career, attacking the baby bells after they trained us.
Well, but we had something, Dan, that I think, probably helped us, which was, the Bell system was very rigid. promotion was by tenure rather than by competence sometimes. It's very rare that young people got way ahead. But that breakup of AT&T created a whole series of things that all the experience in Bell System didn't know what to do with. I mean, things like pre-subscription and feature group D trunks and stuff like that was all new to them. So it gave me an opportunity in the Bell System to interact. I remember I was invited to this Friday meeting because I was their quote unquote pre-subscription expert. And it was me at second level and everybody else was fifth to seventh level. And that exposure, it was great. I loved it. But, that's what the divestiture did. It created opportunities for people where you didn't have to have 30 years of experience in a Bell Central office to get ahead.
Yeah. And most of the companies that became the competitors to Bell System were led by people, not just at the CEO level, but at the next couple levels down, who had no experience with the Bell System at all.
Right.
They were attacking the Bell System, but they didn't really know the lingo. They didn't really know how it worked. To some point, that was an advantage because they weren't kind of pre-programmed to think like a monopolist. In other respects, they needed people like you and me who understood how the system really worked and how the lingo worked and what they were really talking about and how to really put together a viable operating company that can compete against the Bell companies.
It was a fascinating time. I mean, with all the change, I mean, he took the biggest company in the world and split it into, baby bells. And, it was a great learning experience for me. But, much to my parents' chagrin, in 1988, a friend of mine from West Point called me, a guy named Nate Cantor, and convinced me to go over to MCI.
Yep.
And I spent from 88 to 2000 to the WorldCom situation at MCI. It was...
What was the CEO? Was Gogan still there? Is I pronouncing his name?
No, McGowan.
So he was already...
Burt Roberts was the president. And then, McGowan passed and Burt Roberts took over. And then Dan Ackerson was, by the way, another Naval Academy grad in my life. But very smart man that had many great CEO jobs in his life. He ran the place for a while, but it was, when I read through your book, Dan, I noticed there were times in your career that you had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun at MCI. I mean, it was a bunch of, people that just wanted to be disruptive to the Bell. We had a common enemy. It was easy to rally around. The culture was one of the best cultures I've ever been involved with. It was just pure fun until some guy from Mississippi, came in and bought the company.
Yeah. Well, I didn't, we were all so busy in those years. And until I really sat down and researched the book, I either didn't remember or never knew kind of the full dynamic of how WorldCom ended up to be the owner of MCI. The whole part about, what BT did. And I think, GT trying to get in the mix, if I remember right.
You remember correctly.
How visible was that to you at the time? Or were you hunkered down, kind of doing your day?
We were so sure it was going to happen, Dan. I was the data services representative.
You were so certainty was going to happen is what you meant?
We were so sure that the BT merger was going to happen. That's correct. Yeah.
British Telecom.
Right.
Initially, it was British Telecom, the AT&T equivalent in the UK, who already was partners with MCI through the Concert venture.
That's right.
And those two were going to merge and be kind of a global powerhouse. So they reached agreement. If I remember right, they got shareholder approval. Everything seemed to be on track.
Well, everything was on track until one of BT's largest shareholders said, "We don't like this deal and we don't think you should do it." So, BT ran into a little trouble on that front. But we were already, I was already on an integration team. I was working with people from BT on how to integrate our companies and our product sets and stuff like that. So this WorldCom curveball was just that, a curveball.
Yeah. And do you remember who the investor was that was decided they didn't want the deal to happen?
It was a large insurance company. I forget which one.
Oh, so an institutional investor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but at that point, the deal was already signed and sealed, but then MCI delivers some bad results in a particular quarter, which gave BT um, a way to renegotiate the deal. I don't know if it really gave them a way to get out of the deal per se, but they saw a chance to recut the deal, lower the price, which they thought, hey, what a great opportunity. We'll spend a little bit less and move on. Do you remember how it played out from there?
Well, that was exactly what happened, Dan. We had poor results. That large institutional investor exerted their influence and said, "You're paying too much for results like that." The guy with the cowboy hat and cowboy boots, went to Wall Street and started telling everybody they'd had cash to pay for MCI. GTE stepped up to the table and said, we might be interested as well. So for a couple of 3 weeks, we were getting up every morning, reading the financial headlines to find out who was the lead horse in acquiring MCI. At the end of the day, Bernie Ebbers won.
Yeah, because in those days, like today, when you pick up kind of the business tech news, you'll read about Amazon and Google and NVIDIA. But in those days, the news was dominated by companies like WorldCom and we'll get into names of the people we worked for, but it was the telecom industry and the emergence of .com that was all over the headlines of the business section. So when this deal was going on with WorldCom and BT, and GTE, it was front page business news in the Wall Street Journal and all the business sections of the major press. So you didn't have to it's very hard to see what was going on. Now, what was being reported versus what was happening was not always 100% aligned, but a lot more accurate than I suspect press is today.
Yeah, but there's a lot of accurate historical accounts of what happened. But listen, at the end of the day, Bernie came up with his offer, and he carried the day, and MCI was his. So made all of us nervous, to tell you the truth. We didn't know him. We knew him by reputation alone. He came in, and truthfully, Dan, within a month, I knew that company wasn't for me. It was a massive culture change. It was, a different set of people who were, they were just not aligned with what I was used to at MCI, and had to go to a customer. I remember one of the experiences I had was a couple of days after the merger, they called all my guys together. I had built an operating team that I thought was world class. And we literally got lectured on our lack of intensity and the fact that we didn't work enough and that all that kind of stuff. And, I just said to myself, oh boy, this is not good. About 3 weeks later, I made a decision to leave, which, by the way, I'm giving myself credit for making that decision. I was probably going to get thrown out anyway, because I was kind of pissed off at the whole situation to begin with. Anyway.
And you shared with me a name that, I won't share on here, but someone that was there before you got there. Well, that person is someone I worked with. He was a colleague, not a close colleague, and not for a long period of time. But when you told me the story and kind of mentioned the context of that name, I'm like, oh, I agree with Bill on this one.
Hey, here's a small world. That person, Dan, I actually worked with his brother at New York Tel.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So, it's a small telecom world. How many times do you run into the same people over and over again during your career, right?
Yeah, exactly. And your chairman, Bert, Robert, he stayed with WorldCom on the board for a pretty extended period of time.
He did. Bert was not treated regally on the merger. Bert was he retained his chairman title and had the MCI Air Force reporting it to him, as Bernie referred to it. It was 3 planes and about 8 or 10 pilots, I guess. And Bert's only job as chairman was to get rid of the Air Force.
But he stuck around for a lot longer.
He did stay on the board for a while. You're right.
Great. So you leave there. How did you decide to end up where you ended up with that manholes above your head?
Yeah. So, it was the height of the internet bubble. Everything was cooking, right? There wasn't the corridor near Dulles Airport was full of new startup telecom companies. They were popping up all over. How hard was it going to be to find a job? I was excited about the prospect. I didn't take any time off after leaving. Within 6 months, I found a job right in White Plains, New York, which is close to where I live. It was a company called Metro Media Fiber Network. It was a company that contrary to the, sort of the level threes and other companies, they were not focused on building networks between cities. They were focused on building metro networks. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people thought they were crazy because how could you build a network to compete with the incumbent provider who has spent years and years and years and billions of dollars building this metro network? Well, that didn't deter some guy named Stephen Garofalo and the Metro Media people under John Kluge thought it was a good idea. So they funded a company to do just that, to build metro networks in major cities around the U.S. and over in Europe.
And there were others building metro cities in those days. My company, MFS, there was Teleport, who was also headquartered in New York. There was Nextlink that turned into XO. There was Brooks Fiber. But Metro Media fiber networks took a different approach than all of the other ones. Other ones all took similar approaches, but what you guys were doing was very different. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, so the idea was that we were going to use these manholes like you see behind me and in these crowded cities, and we were going to put very, very large strand cables in. We put in 432 or 864 fiber cables in the ground. And we were going to sell something that was relatively new to the market, which was called dark fiber. I can't tell you how many times I had to explain what dark fiber was. It sounds like an anomaly, but the reality is it's the ability to use the fiber and put however much capacity you want on it with your own equipment. And it was a term that the founder, Stephen Garofalo, came up with. So we put these large strand count cables all around the metro areas. We connected them we did have a long haul network. And by the way, early on, we bought a data center company whose name was AboveNet. And, we made what I consider the first stab at what was really all of the digital infrastructure pieces, the data center, the fiber, and the real estate.
And on the fiber side, when you mentioned the fiber count, put that in perspective. Today, when people are putting fiber and conduits in a metro environment, they'll stuff it full of fiber. They'll put, hundreds, even thousands. But back then, when you guys were putting in 400, growing to 800, most of the rest of us were putting in way less. When we'd look at a suburban deployment, there'd be arguments as to whether we really need to do 24 fibers instead of 12 because, we could put this ring on the 12 fibers and it would carry all this bandwidth, and we only need to use 2 up front and maybe 2 more as a backup, and the rest are going to sit idle, and optronics is going to advance. And I remember just being in discussions with the engineering side, because I was heavily involved in the expansion of the businesses, and it would just be, 36. Do we really have to do 48? How about 12? It was really in that range because of the thought this optronics was going to make, it unnecessary to spend a tiny bit more on a little bit of extra fiber, and people are trying to get the business plan to pencil in. You guys come in, stuff them with fiber, but you know what? The rest of the industry didn't follow you guys, not for a while. The rest of the industry looked and said, we don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it. It must be this construction guy in New York who doesn't understand the business. I think everyone by their reactions took you lightly in terms of that strategy, but you guys proved to be extraordinarily right, and everyone else proved to be extraordinarily not right on that regard.
That was, I'll give credit to where credit's due. That was Stephen Garofalo's vision. He was, while we were deploying 864s and 432 cables, he was actually looking into the higher count cables to put even more in place. I mean, he firmly believed that was the way to go. Listen, I've listened to and understand the argument that, pair fiber has almost infinite capacity. I mean, they're deploying 800 gig and terabit waves now. So, I mean, I get that point, but the idea that you could use fiber, as something that a customer could literally own and throttle their own capacity on was, I guess the essence of the business plan. And like you said, it worked. The JP Morgans and the Oracles and, the Googles and the Apples, they all love the idea.
Yeah. And to buy a fiber cable that had that many fibers in it back then was not off the shelf. You guys probably have to convince the fiber manufacturers to put that many fibers in the cable, I suspect.
We did. I mean, we took plenty of tours of the fiber plants that were making these 864s and 432s, because there wasn't a heck of a lot of them going on. So we did have to do some convincing, but we had the money and we bought well in advance. So we stockpiled it so that we had to build. We had enough.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Steve, Garofalo, and who he was and what his personality was like. And, as you got to know him better, what did you learn about Steve?
So Steve Garofalo is probably the most Damon Runyon-like character I ever met. I mean, he is a pure New Yorker. He's a relatively quiet guy unless you know him. But when I started working at Metro Media, I got along fine with him and we developed a great relationship. He's one of those guys, Dan, that comes running down the hall with about 10 ideas a day. And you always listen to him because like one of those 10 is going to be worth billions of dollars. You just got to figure out which one, right? The other 9 are ludicrous and ridiculous, but that one idea that he comes up with, you say, wow, that could work. Yeah. So
and not to lose $2 billion on the other 9.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. That was our challenge. But he's a very good-hearted person. He was passionate about the business. He had taken over his father's electric company. It was Garofalo Electric, was actually a pretty big electric company in New York. And, when he started doing his fiber thing, people wanted him to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. I mean, it was just not done. It was, it was crazy stuff at that time. But, again, he turned out to be a visionary, and, timing is everything too. I think that, if he had survived the internet boom a little, I think, might have had a different outcome for him. I mean, he was on the cover of Forbes magazine, holding fibers, and it said the $4 billion man. That was the height of the AboveNet or the Metro Media boom at the time.
Oh, we're gonna have to see if we get our hands on that cover. I did not see that cover. I might have had the article, but I didn't realize he was on the cover. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then comes along this other New York guy who has a little bit of money in his pocket, and he becomes Garofalo's partner. Who's that guy, and what was that all
guy
about?
Was, he owned a radio station, he owned airwaves, he owned a big name. It was John Kluge. Metro Media Company was, John was a billionaire, probably number 3 or 4 in the world at times. And he bought into Stephen's idea, lock, stock, and barrel, and funded a lot of the expansion that came along. John showed up every once in a while at the company, but really the brunt of the work was done by a guy named Stu Subotnick. And Stu went on to become...
He was at the tail end of his career, right? I mean,
Yes. Mr. Kluge was he was well into his 80s, might have even been 90. I'll tell you a funny story, Dan. First board meeting I went to, I'm excited. I'm with this new company. John Kluge's involved and stuff. And of course, it has a star-studded board. I get to the board meeting. I'm on time, but there's one chair left at the board table. So I go and I sit down. I turn to my right and I say, "Hi, I'm Bill LaPerch." And the guy sticks out and goes, "Oh, hello, I'm John Kluge." I said, "Oh, I guess I should have known that." I turn to my left, the other board member. "Hi, I'm Bill LaPerch." The guy says, "Oh, hi, I'm David Rockefeller." Then I just sit there going, "Oh my God, I'm sitting between John Kluge and David Rockefeller. How did I get here?"
And at that time, they're 2 of the richest people, period. You know?
Yeah.
And that's in today's world. That's like Elon Musk on one side of you, and one of the Google founders on the other side of you.
Yeah.
They were the royalty of the business world.
So, listen, I was very happy where I was. It was a great place to be. And then this thing, the bubble burst, right? And like I tell everybody, Metro Media only had 2.
Before we get to the bubble burst, tell me about some of the other people around the table in those years that were with Metro Media who were kind of getting involved in the business. You mentioned one of them.
Stephen Garofalo was, a true founder, right? He was not a big corporate type guy. It wasn't his environment. They hired a GE executive named Howard Finkelstein. Howard came in, and his job was to sort of institutionalize the company, put processes in place, do that type of stuff. He was actually the guy that hired me when I got there. He stayed around for 3 or 4 years. He did his job. He actually did well. He cashed out at, not the height, but pretty close to the height. Decided he wanted to go do something else. And then they put this guy, Nick Tanzi, in charge. Nick was essentially the sales guy under Howard. Nick had the helm during 9/11. He had the helm during several refinancings. Nick spent a lot of time explaining to the board, explaining to the public, explaining to all those analysts, those famous analysts that were out there pushing all the time, why we were, only going to 30 cities instead of 50, and, why the revenue isn't coming in quicker, and why what is this dark fiber stuff and things like that. So Nick had a tough job, but he did the best he could, up until a point where, as I said, the internet bubble burst. So, but during that time, we were building hand over fist in all the NFL cities. We were building over in Europe. There was, the similarity that strikes me, it was an AI like frenzy. Not one analyst ever asked us about profitability or cash. They asked us about market share and how much capital he is spending.
Yeah. And before you got to a point where the bust hit, you guys did some strategic deals with Verizon. So Verizon was a new logo, but an old company, and that had roots in your prior employer. And I think you also did a pretty strategic deal with GTE/Genuity, if my memory's right. I could be wrong
about. That was mostly a financial deal. Both were financial deals. Verizon, truthfully, Dan, Verizon wanted to buy us. They liked all that fiber in the ground and thought it was the right thing. The problem with Verizon couldn't buy us though, because they had this deal in New York, which, I'm sure you're familiar with as well, this Empire City subway deal, right? Where they get to use all the conduits under New York City for free. If they bought us, they were in danger of losing that. So instead of buying us, they invested in us. They were caught up in the internet frenzy as well and wanted to make investments in it. And we were one of their investments. They invested $1.2 billion in us.
Yeah, a lot of money, $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
Comes in the door, and then Verizon goes to buy GTE, which at the time also owned Genuity. Genuity was part of GTE, which made them have to spin out Genuity. But that was Genuity. I think had a big, not that big, but it had a material relation with you guys as well.
Yeah,
pretty much everyone had from a commercial standpoint. Like, who on the commercial side in the telecom world wasn't a customer of MFN in those days? Pretty much everyone was.
Yeah, we had a good customer base. The way I used to describe our customers was, if your business required a large amount of bandwidth, you needed AboveNet. That was the deal. We were beyond those private lines and T1s and DS3s. If you were a large consumer of a lot of bandwidth, you ought to have a conversation with us, and that's essentially what happened. And during that time also, strategically, the operational acquisitions we made were this company called AboveNet. AboveNet was originally a data center company based in the Silicon Valley. As part of AboveNet, there was also a little company, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called PAX. It was run by a guy named Paul Vixie, and PAX stood for Palo Alto Internet Exchange. And Dan, it was the first Mimi room. It was the first, real place where everybody met to connect, right? And it was kind of a brilliant idea, a little before its time, but that was going to be, sort of the third leg of our stool, the data center piece of it, AboveNet piece of it. And, those acquisitions were made, just prior to the bust as well. And everybody was having a hard time about, we were spending like drunken sailors, truthfully. And as a result, we had a lot on our plate from both the fiber, data center, and PAX point of view.
Yeah. no doubt. And then the whole market's going like crazy. You know, all of your customers are quickly running out of money, being exposed in many cases for very bad behavior, business behavior, and then some fraud otherwise. So you guys are, you know, scrambling along with all kinds of networks under construction, probably all kind of commitments that you are had made to customers who are supposed to pay you when you deliver fiber, but those same customers, you don't know if they're going to have any money to pay you as you're finishing the networks. What was happening? I mean, it's hard to put ourselves back in the state of mind because there was, we talk about the fog of war. There's this obviously wasn't war where people are shooting at you, but there was a fog of war that went on those years because every day you would look at the paper or talk to a colleague in your company or outside, and there was another big piece of news that would be popping up, and you just could not make sense of what was happening.
Yeah, fog of war is a good way to describe it. I remember describing the company's dilemma. I told people we only had two problems. One was our customers had no money, and the other was neither did we. So other than those two problems, things were fine. Then I remember going to like data center sites and fiber builds, and it was like war. There was just abandoned material everywhere. There were people that literally walked away from jobs. It was, it looked like the enemy had just gone through the fiber world and the data center world and destroyed everything. And, all these billions and billions of dollars were literally wasted. So, out of this challenge, if, you have to ask yourself, like, what can you make of it? And, one of the things that I sort of learned during this time and going through this process is that as disappointing as bankruptcy is, you're disappointed for your shareholders, you're disappointed for your investors, you're disappointed for your employees. But the people who wrote the U.S. bankruptcy code were pretty smart. I mean, they wrote a code that allows good assets a second chance. And the one thing that I think the company did well was proceed through the bankruptcy process and use it as it was intended. So
to amplify what you're saying right now, other countries don't have this concept of a Chapter 11. You go to Europe and bankruptcy means Chapter 7. It means you got to liquidate your assets. In our country, there's that alternative, Chapter 7, which means you literally have to sell everything off and go away. But the other one, Chapter 11, what you're describing is kind of an opportunity to restructure yourself and live to fight another fight, which is what you guys were able to do, you and several others, but you were able to do. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure people are following it, kind of understand the importance of that.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. That's exactly what we have it for. And for those people that haven't been through it, I mean, it's an arduous process. It's emotional. You often have to let people go. You have to cut costs dramatically. You have a bunch of creditors that are mad at you because you owe them money and you're not going to be able to pay it all back. And they're all vying for getting at least some of it back. But, the judge oversees this process. And, we had a very experienced and fair judge, in my view, that got us through the process. And
how were you involved during that? That was like a 2 or 3 year period.
Yeah.
Remember right?
So actually, Dan, we made it through in 15 months.
Okay. Wow. So,
yeah. During that period, Nick Tansey left right before we went into bankruptcy. The board asked me to be CEO. I saw that we were headed to bankruptcy. And I told Stu and Mr. Kluge, I said, you know what? I don't think I'm ready to be CEO. I'll run the company, but let's bring in someone that could be the CEO figurehead and face this bankruptcy process. And that guy was a guy named John Gerdelman. Okay. And John was a previous boss of mine at MCI. He was the CEO for about that 15 months. He literally, he had the pleasure of meeting with the lawyers and the accountants and the creditors and stuff like that. Well, I had to go to some of the meetings, but I essentially ran the company. And I think that approach really helped us a lot. It allowed me to focus on running the company. And John was very good going through the bankruptcy process.
Yeah, it's interesting. And anything during Okay, so there's one other name that I didn't realize was involved in this story until I was doing the research. Then you clarified it a little bit more because turned out he, behind the scenes, was involved pretty much from the beginning to the end. Another billionaire who invested in MFN and then AboveNet. Tell us what you know about that.
So Craig McCaw was actually a friend of John Kluge's, and by friend I mean they had done business together. Craig McCaw bought John Kluge's. Remember when pagers were big? Remember those things we used to carry around? Those pagers.
Yeah,
it seemed like ancient material now, but those pagers had airwaves and spectrum that they needed, and Kluge owned a lot of it. He sold that to Craig McCaw in a multi-billion-dollar deal. And that started a very long and lasting partnership between the two where they co-invested a lot. So when Metro Media invested in, when Kluge invested in Metro Media, Craig McCaw was side by side with him for about 19% of the investment. Craig kept that investment through the entire bankruptcy process and, and stayed with us. And I had the opportunity to go and meet him several times out in Seattle, and his Eagle River guys would get quarterly updates from me on how the company was doing. And he was a passive investor, but an interested one. He would require that I come out and give the briefings, but he was not like a mean activist or anything. He was just his money was in. And at the end of the day, Mr. McCaw took out 13 times his money when you so generously bought us.
Well, what's interesting is it's been kind of hard for Craig to be too critical of what was going on with MFN, given that he was going through a similar mess himself with XO.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, he was. That's right. Yeah,
well, middle black kind of situation. But so he knew firsthand that this was far more complicated than how a particular company is running their business. There was so much going on that
did you ever meet him, Dad?
I am trying to think if I ever met him. If I did, it was in a large group meeting. I spent a lot of time with Wayne Perry. I assume Wayne was involved with your stuff and negotiated against him in a couple of the most critical deals for level 3, the intercity dark fiber, both the original deal and then the workout of those deals, which, we were both level 3 and XO were in survival mode. So that was anything but, a friendly dynamic. Actually, I take that back. The second one was not with them because that was with Dan Ackerson and Nate Davis. Was the workout. But
Nate Davis was his boss of mine. He was one of my bosses at MCI.
Well, there you go. But I did spend a fair amount of time with Nextlink because once we did those deals, we were then jointly building. We were building out the intercity networks, but we were also using some of their metro networks. So there was a lot of day-to-day interaction between our teams. So I don't know that I ever met Craig, which is unfortunate.
Well, the distinguishing characteristic for me personally, unlike you and I, Craig is a very, very soft-spoken person. Like if you're in a meeting with them, like you have a hard time hearing what he's saying.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And like I was in a meeting with him twice and I came out like a nervous wreck thinking like I missed important stuff because he's so soft spoken. But I guess when you're him, like nobody has the nerve to say, "Hey, Craig, could you speak up?"
How about it? Okay. So now you guys are coming out of bankruptcy, relatively short stint. John Gerlman, he's moving on and you're now at the helm and you guys go on an incredible run of value creation. What was the stock price equivalent coming out of bankruptcy? Do you recall?
We came out, the stock price was the equivalent would have been about, we came out at 27, but we split one. So we it's the equivalent of about 13.5.
So 13.5 up to mid 80s in a relatively short number of years. So huge value creation from that point forward. And you did it almost entirely through day-to-day running of the business, through organic kind of execution. So tell us kind of, as you came out of bankruptcy, what was going on in your mind? What was, because culture coming out of it, there was probably shell shock going on. People still weren't sure where the industry was headed, what was really going on. So how did you kind of get the whole team
Yeah.
Now you're called AboveNet. You're no longer called MFN, coming out of that bankruptcy. So AboveNet really, really the only CEO of AboveNet after it was a data center company was you.
Yeah.
So what did you do from that point, to get you guys on a good...
I mean, when I look back, like if I ever mistakenly use the word I in the next few minutes, it really should be the word we. I think I told you I brought 15 guys with me from MCI, and I sprinkled them across the company in various operating positions geographically and functionally. And, I was a CEO and I was in charge and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that everything we accomplished as a team. I had like the greatest group of people around me that you can imagine. So, whatever we accomplished, we did it as a team. We came out of bankruptcy hurting. Like we had been through, the bankruptcy process worked, but we cut a lot of costs. We cut a lot of people. We had tried to save a lot of money, and we did. Cash was king. Every day I looked at where we were from a cash perspective. We didn't come out of bankruptcy with any kind of strategy that said, we're going to acquire our way back to prosperity. We came out of bankruptcy thinking we have $4.5 billion worth of fiber in the ground. It's presently not used. Let's figure out how to sell and operate this fiber and make some money. And that essentially is what we did. The bubble was over. Things were starting to rejuvenate. Bandwidth was still increasing. People were using more and more bandwidth all the time. And back in those days, Dan, we had some unique routes. We had some uniqueness to the fiber that we had in place. Not everybody had it. So we used that uniqueness to sell. And I had a great sales team. I had a great operating team. They understood the need that customers had for this bandwidth, and that's what we did. We did it with discipline, though. We did it with we had our deal metrics. If we were evaluating a deal, we wanted to make sure that deal made sense. Made sense by getting a payback in a reasonable time. Made sense in terms of how much cash we had outlay at the beginning, stuff like that. And I think that deal discipline really helped us in a big way. But like, as you said, we did it all operating internally and not really looking around for assets to acquire. We had $4.5 billion of assets. Let's monetize those.
And you had some other assets too that were worth a whole bunch of money that allowed you to kind of build up your cash reserves to focus on your core business. What were those other assets, and how'd you monetize those?
So if you remember, AboveNet was a data center company, and we had those data centers still in our portfolio. Most of them made it through the bankruptcy process. One of the strategic forks in the road that I had to come to was that I believe that both data centers and fiber were going to grow. But the question I asked myself is, where was I more differentiated? At that time, there were data center companies like Equinix and others growing up, and there was competition there. I thought I was more differentiated with the fiber. What I did is I sold the data center companies and literally used all of those proceeds to make sure that I was connected to every data center I could be. And I think that paid dividends for many, many years for AboveNet.
And there were some big markets that you guys were intending on building toward before bankruptcy, but you hadn't yet gotten to. So you also were expanding organically into some very important markets at that point. So you were able to use that money that you raised, not just to get into more and more data centers, but to get into a lot of the key markets that you either had small coverage in or none whatsoever.
We did that, Dan. We did that though because there was a link between those new markets and where our customers wanted to go. I mean, one of the problems with the internet era was, right, build it and they will come. We were past that. We were going to build these new markets, but we were only going to build there if 4 of our customers were committed to do business with us there. So, we would use that money to get the build going, but, very quickly we'd get business in there that made sense for us to to be in that market. So it was not a speculative build in the way that people normally think of it. It was on the back of customer demand and customers asking us to get there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and given your guys' platform, and the customers you're serving, I mean, you guys had such a great customer base. A lot of times those customers, they wanted you to serve them more ubiquitously. You guys were big with the financial sector as an example, and the financial sector doesn't want to piece together a bunch of network from a bunch of different sources. They will if they have to, and they'll certainly use multiple vendors, but they really want to have a handful of go-to vendors who can serve them broadly in the markets that they care most about. And I think those are probably the type of customers who were driving you to kind of add some of those other key locations.
Yeah, we had, the case I remember most vividly, we had a very, very large financial customer that wanted to go to, it was in the New York metro market, but it was really in central Jersey. It was like 26 miles from my nearest network point. And building in New Jersey, as you undoubtedly know, is one of the more challenging things you can do in our business.
Yeah, I'll go way back to my MFS days when our sales team, and this is early, this is like, I'm only at MFS for a year or two at this point. And our New York sales team sells this gigantic deal. I think it was with Bear Stearns at the time, where Bear Stearns had a new office located in, probably 25 miles west of Manhattan in New Jersey. And the sales team committed that we would have a diverse fiber loop there within, 9 months. And you had to go through, I don't know how many municipalities, how many cable companies, everyone had blocking rights over you. And it was an absolute nightmare. And we ended up cutting a deal with the cable company, and it was a stupid deal and horrible deal. And everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And of course, the salespeople got all mad at us for taking too long to build it. It's like, how could you sign up that deal to begin with? So
yeah, you described New Jersey perfectly. I mean, to this day, by the way, to this day, it still has that reputation. It's a very, very hard place to do business. But I remember it was for Goldman Sachs. We built to an old Olivetti typewriter plant that they were making into a data center, and it was 26 miles. And the contract was for 3 years, and according to deal metrics, we wouldn't get payback for like 5.5 years. And that was not a deal that I would normally do. But Goldman said, "Nah, we're probably going to order some more." And when I looked at the route, there was nice things along the route. Making a long story short, it took me about 14 months to build it. By the time I built it, we had revenue on that route where the payback was in 6.5 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
that's the way we both did business, Dan. Right? I mean, that was that was the major difference between the pre-internet bubble and the post-internet bubble is we managed cash and we did good deals with discipline.
Yeah, you mentioned the discipline, the deal metrics. We would do that, during the bubble, but we really wouldn't take it seriously. It's like you kind of go through the motions. Oh, we want to expand into this city. Oh, we need a business plan, a financial model that tells us, what return did you want again? Oh, yeah, at least 22%. What terminal value did you want us to use? Oh, yeah, you can use this terminal value. And then you do the math and put a nice presentation together, and there it is.
Yeah.
After the bubble, as you're describing, it's a whole different ballgame. Now you really, really, really cared, if that incremental investment decision was going to have a payoff. Now, there still was a lot of ways you could go about that. I think the industry rightfully got very conservative for a number of years. Every deal had to prove itself in with very little factoring in of upside. For a while there, no one to hear about, second tenants, no one to hear about, new orders that would come through as you were building it. It was like, does it pay back or not? Anything else needs to be treated as upside. And then, as the industry started to settle down, I guess I'll put it that way, you started to see opportunities where, hell, someone's going to give you a lot of money and pays for half of a really interesting route, that gets you to data centers or cloud locations. You can take the risk on the other half.
Yeah.
And you started to get
judgment is needed, right? I mean, that's the message. It's good to have the deal discipline and the rules in place, but judgment is needed. And if sometimes you win, hopefully you win more than you lose. And fortunately, I think both of us did that.
Yeah. Well, you guys won a lot more than you lost in that period of time you were at the helm. Uh, so you're going along and your stock price is going up at the same time. And, I experienced this myself. At the same time, you're watching private deals getting done for lesser assets quality wise than you guys had. Um, but for far higher multiples than the public markets are trading you at. So, you must have been watching that for a number of years, seeing that kind of playing out. And you're like, well, that's great. They got a couple more turns on the multiple. We'll grow into that. And you guys kept growing your stock price because you were delivering on numbers, but your multiple, the public company multiples, you're probably as weighed down by some of your public company peers, like the level threes of the world in those years, as you were bolstered by some of these private transactions that seem to be putting more value on kind of similar assets, but similar but inferior. So how were you guys making sense of that as you were seeing? First of all, was that happening through your guys' vantage point? And so, how would you make sense of it when talking to bankers and kind of public investors, private investors, all that stuff?
Well, I mean, Dan, the bankers made a living out of explaining that to me, just like you did, right? Like the multiple phenomena, and the bankers. I can't tell you how many times I got calls, with a private deal that was going to be 4 or 5 turns above what I'm trading. For the most part, we kept our nose to the grindstone and kept building and kept doing what what we were doing. When I look back on it, I'm not sure like that was the most brilliant strategy. I think that maybe I should have paid a little bit more attention to some of those private multiples and acquisitions. I mean, certainly I had the private equity people around me telling me, what a great company we were and how they would take us private and it would be all great. But, for the most part though, nose to the grindstone, just keep doing what we're doing. I probably believed for too long that the multiple in the public market would fix itself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it should have, the public markets, missed that because they should have kind of better understood, but they were tainted as well by not just by what happened during the meltdown, but there still was a lot of, distress going on in kind of the name companies that had survived the meltdown, but they weren't on the same kind of run as you guys were on. You guys were steady performance, growth, good cash flow, but a lot of the other companies that had survived it still were finding their ways. So it was muddled for the public investors as well. No doubt about that.
Well, then, both you and I had the opportunity to be in what we would term pure plays, right? We were a pure play fiber company, and we didn't have the distraction of an old copper network. We didn't have a distraction of a lot of legacy things that these other companies were carried around. So that was that was more of an advantage than I think people realized, and should have been valued higher than what public markets were valuing it at.
Yeah. I think I would have unbundled loops and
please.
Sitting there that we had to make sense. We had because of some of our acquisitions, especially later on, Allstream came with a lot of legacy stuff, and ELI did for us as well. But Allstream was also a very fantastic deal with us. But you guys truly were a pure play. I mean, you truly were able to build up using kind of, Steve's strategy from the very beginning. That kind of guided you guys all the way through. So you weren't a hodgepodge of different kind of networks that had different origins and different configurations and different stacks of service on top of them. It was as pure play as you could get at scale. There are other pure plays.
So Dan, do you think we've come to full circle? I mean, I actually advocate to people I hang around that pure play provider of bandwidth and dark fiber and maybe even conduits is probably the best play available in the fiber sector right now.
Yeah, I think if you ask the Lumen CEO what she thinks, she'd say, yes, I wish that's what my business
Cool.
was, because they obviously have had a big run up in their stock price. They were trading 50 cents a share not too long ago, $1 a share for a long time. They jump up materially, as I'm sure you noticed just a couple months ago, multiple dollars a share. And it was all on the backs of kind of AI and providing fiber infrastructure to support the big tech companies. At least that's how they positioned it. So I think, the whole Lumen experience right now is a case in point of what you're saying, that they have a ton of legacy stuff still to deal with. And that's a drag on their business in a big way. The problem is, how do you separate that? How do you tear that apart?
Yeah.
The business you described.
The first problem might be, how do you find it? When you think about all the companies that Lumen represents today,
yeah,
you got to believe that there's some stuff out there that they don't even know about.
A lot. And then you even look at Crown Castle and all they brought a lot of fiber companies, and a lot of them were really quality assets, as you know.
Yeah.
Yet even trying to separate that business out, they realize, okay, we're a tower company, and this. There's one thing you got right, and I got very wrong, was this whole small cell thing, because we were sticking our necks out there doing these small cell deals, on the full expectation that there's be a lot of densification, and even though the commercial terms were really hard to stomach, we always we assumed that would fix itself, because more and more small cells would be needed, and it just didn't happen. Well, Crown Castle, the tower company, also believed that, and they bought several fiber companies. So fast forward to now, small cells didn't develop. They found out that they were a tower company. What are we doing? Trying to run a bandwidth business. So they're trying to separate it, but they can't draw the line of what is their fiber business that should be extracted versus what is their tower business, because these things that are small cells and fiber that feeds the towers kind of make it hard to draw the line. And so you'd think that would be an easy one to solve for. And Zayo too. I mean, Zayo, we were constantly trying to figure out, can we create more separation between the parts of business that largely came with Allstream and ELI, but were very traditional kind of competitive telecom. How can we separate that from the core fiber and bandwidth business? And we could never crack that nut. Finally sold it and figured, let the new guys figure it out. So it's hard.
So I feel that, like, early on in the AboveNet adventure, like we were able to sell to our larger customers bandwidth because we were the only guys that had it in a particular area. I mean, you know the old rule, Dan, whoever's closest wins, right? In terms of your network and where the customer is. So we had an advantage in our ubiquity, in our uniqueness. Today, I feel like, at least in the major cities, there's 3 or 4 vendors available for every connectivity need you have. So I think that the differentiation today becomes more at the software layer. What kind of SD-WAN, what kind of unified communications do you have on top of your network that differentiates you? I tell people this all the time. I think 3 years from now, the largest phone company in America is going to be Microsoft.
Yeah. Yeah. Microsoft and Google. I think that's the biggest challenge when it comes to value creation with the fiber platforms, is so much fiber has found its way into Google and Amazon and Microsoft, and they in essence bundle the bandwidth services when you go buy cloud services from them, because that bandwidth needs to move. The data needs to move all around, but once you connect to their networks, they're doing all of the moving around of the bandwidth. It's not Zayo or Lumen. But I do think, I haven't stayed as close to the industry since we sold Zayo, but I still, and this may be just because I'm not close to the industry, but I still believe it's in the bandwidth layer that that the bigger companies need to thrive on. If I take Zayo, for example, there's very few places that a complex business can go to for a pretty broad need. And what they want, they want the service delivered to them in a way that they understand, that's dependable, whether it's the service activation process or how it works afterwards. And they want the one provider to get to a whole bunch of locations. And if you can layer on that kind of software tools make that service experience really solid, no one else can really match you. Verizon would have trouble, AT&T would have trouble. Lumen, I think at some point can get there, but they have a much bigger kind of hurdle to overcome. Having said that, Zayo's struggled to deliver kind of a quality experience for the customer. If they could crack that nut, I think they could go on a really nice run for a long period of time to come. But I think it does.
They have the assets to do it, Dan. And I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is, scale is going to matter, and the service delivery and service experience is going to matter. I do think though that it worries me that the phone is just an app on Microsoft Teams now.
Yes, yeah. No, the whole counter to that is exactly what you're saying. That the big, big tech companies, at least the three we mentioned, and arguably Facebook as well, they just do so much of the bandwidth inherent in the services that they're offering. It gets overlooked because you're like, I'm buying cloud services, or I'm using their app. Well, all that data that needs to be moved around, who's doing that? Yes, it's on the fiber that we collectively built, but that doesn't mean that the current owners of that fiber are collecting money for the bandwidth traveling through. They already gave the fiber away, or they're giving more fiber away and are using. I mean, we have to do that. So I don't, sometimes ask if I could have helped maneuver that better, but who knows?
Yeah.
Did you follow the run up in Lumen's kind of stock price when it jumped from like 1 to?
Yeah, I did.
So,
yeah.
By the way, what all are you still involved with in the industry? I know you've worked with the private equity community, helping advise them. You at least were on a couple of the boards.
Yeah.
Where are you at right now?
So after I sold the company, I came home and I cleaned out the basement once, and then I started cleaning it out again. And my wife said, "Get out of here. This is not what you're supposed to be doing." And actually, then I've created a nice little ecosystem of digital infrastructure. Right, I sit on a digital realty board. Great to be in a data center company now, right? I sit on the Windstream board. The Windstream board is, it's a very interesting place to be. I mean, Elliot's actively involved. It's going to, similar to the Bell system breaking up and being put back together. We're now seeing that Unity and Windstream are going to be put back together. So, that'll happen over the next year. I sit on the First Light board. First Light is a regional telco up in the Northeast. I'm on a board of a company called ITG. It's a fiber construction company that does a lot of work for the cable industry. I see Mr. O'Hara in that realm very frequently.
Yeah, I bet. Although he was chairman, and then Billy Beans, who was CEO, just texted me and said he's now chairman, and I didn't ask who was CEO. He just sent me a note earlier this week. So, he's involved, but I think he's pretty lightly involved at this point. And even some of my,
it was a humbling experience, Dan, to be a chairman of a construction company because, as service providers, we deal with these construction guys all the time, right? And them, they're always moaning that they're not making any money and they're doing anything for like 2% margin and stuff like this. And then when you're on the other side, you see that their margin's like 40%. And, it's part of their culture that they do all this stuff as they, as they get the prices from us.
Yeah. Well, the last, 4, 6, 8 years to be in the construction and fiber business has been good times. I mean, all these residential constructions going on right now, all the fiber routes needed by the big tech companies for their identity centers. It's pretty crazy. With
your deal discipline, tell me what you think in general about the fiber to the home business proposition.
Oh, I'm not a proponent at all. People are telling me they're going to prove me wrong on that one, but I'm like, okay, let me get this straight. I mean, either you go into homes where there's so little competition because there's so few homes, and even there, you got to compete with Starlink. So it's not like, even if the government gives you a bunch of money to hit a handful of homes, I still don't know how you make a bunch of money. Or you go to an area that there's an incumbent provider, and usually not one, there's two, because there's the phone company who is probably doing something relative to video. There's, the cable company who's been there for a while. Then you got the T-Mobiles of the world who want to, provide service, wirelessly to pick off customers. And you are, mentioned Starlink, but you're going to have other services coming from the sky. And you're putting a bunch of money in the ground in the form of fiber networks. I'm like, I want to be the construction company getting paid to build it. I don't want to be the, operator who has to then create a nice return for the shareholders.
I think we're in violent agreement there. I tell people that business plan works fine as long as all 4 service providers get 40% market share.
Yeah. That's so there's only 4. You forgot the wire. You got the guys. So 40 times 5. Yeah, that's yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of that. And but people are doing it. A lot of times, you find out there's like I wasn't a big fan of Starlink. I remember when we go visit SpaceX and they tell me this whole Starlink plan, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of money that's going to get wasted away. I'm like, you think you're going to be able to provide a competitive internet service, using this kind of technique, maybe in kind of parts of the world that, but even there, terrestrial wireless is probably going to cap your opportunity. But how wrong was that? Now Starlink thriving. So, no, I don't think
I'm waiting for that. There's going to be some kind of rationalization, right? Like, it's going to matter. There's going to be, 2, maybe 3 providers in each in each market. But I think it totally needs to be rationalized, and I think there's, the bubble is here. $40 billion of government money going into it, plus all their own capital. There's going to be some lost money in this process, but eventually it might work out where you can get a return in 6 or 7 years if you're lucky.
Yeah, maybe. What about all the build outs of data centers being driven by AI? What's your, certainly AI is real, just like bandwidth and the internet was real.
Yeah.
So there's no question that AI, is a big deal and will be a big deal for as long as we live. But as we learned during the internet boom and telecom boom, that doesn't mean that in a zest to, recognize the magnitude of the opportunity that you don't overinvest and then, get out ahead of your skis. I can't tell whether, that's already happening or, that's when a path where that might happen. So relative fiber, is this 1997 or is this, 2001?
So I'm not speaking for Digital Realty on this, but I think that, that the mad rush is on. I think that the demand is off the charts. I think that smart data center companies right now are figuring out, they have a good problem to figure out, like which business to take. I think that the amount of money going into it, Blackstone just bought AirTrunk for a lot of money. All of the data centers now have joint ventures with the private equity funds, billions of dollars to build these data centers. So the frenzy is on. I think there will be some rationalization down the road. And, I wonder how many of the new startups that are buying data centers for the next 15 years and currently have no revenue will make it.
Yep. I spent time this morning with the coolest company that I had no idea was in the data center and cloud business.
Is that right?
Because they're an energy company and, at least their name is, ironically, the name of the company is spelled differently, but the name of the company is Crusoe Energy Systems.
Oh.
So this guy's taking me through his story. And, his story is one of an environmentalist. So he, McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group and did this, did that. And he realized, worked in the oil industry and realized, how much methane gas is being released in the air. And even when they have to burn off oil, it releases much methane, how bad that is for the environment. So figured out how to take that methane and redirect it in order to, power a local, power facility, local regenerator. And then he's like, okay, well, what am I going to do with that? So he's like, well, what if, it kind of intersects this whole AI thing and says, well, we'll get portable data centers built. We'll stuff them with GPUs and put him, in these areas. At first, it was to mine for Bitcoins. So he was using kind of the methane to power these data centers, which are, as when you're mining for Bitcoins, you're chewing up all kinds of power. Well, he's got a power supply that otherwise it's just being put in the air. And so he's mining for Bitcoins. And then the AI thing starts to hit. And he's like, well, I'm going to, repurpose them and put GPUs in them. His business is booming. I mean, he's raised a ton of money, and this is without working with the big tech guys. Now he's working with the big tech guys because they all want, they all want kind of more and more capacity in efficient and green power areas. It was like, you've been doing this in Colorado, and it's the first time I'm understanding what you're doing. I'm like, where was I asleep? But good young.
Power is an issue that we discuss at data center meetings now. I think the statistic I saw was prior to AI, there was 20 additional gigawatts of power needed through 2030. Now there's 50 additional gigawatts needed. It's the numbers are mind numbing. It's sort of thrown off everybody's quest for 100% renewable. Everybody recognizes that, renewable is still important, but you have to use all forms of energy, good and bad, to meet this data center demand.
So there's another company here in Boulder that we're investors in. It's called Radia, and Radia is building the world's largest cargo plane. Okay, out of Boulder, Colorado, world's largest cargo plane, but it's purpose built and designed to carry very large wind turbines, because very large wind turbines can't be inland because you can't get them there. They have to be in one piece. They're way too big to put on a railroad or put on a truck system. So you have to deliver smaller ones inland, and the big ones go on the coast. So they're building this so that they can bring wind turbines inland and, double and then some, 2.5 times the economic, value of wind farms.
Right.
And then, that business plan as well, which they've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, but that's now intersecting the AI-driven need of data centers as green energy. So, they're starting to work with the big tech companies to fund the plane build out. So really cool stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of innovation going on in that area. So, I just saw a flash there giving us some time. We didn't quite see that, Gibbs, so might want to do that again.
Yep.
There it is. All right. So let's see what else. We got to talk about kind of Metro Connect in general. Those are some of my fondest memories of the very first 2, 3, 4 Metro Connects after I got involved in Zayo.
Right.
Prior to that, I think I ever went to one. My memory is that first one I went to, there were so few people there. My memory, and it could be wrong, you were one of the people that was there. It was, handfuls of operators, handful of financiers, maybe 100 people total, which is probably wrong, but that's how I remember it. And it was almost like a kind of a reunion of sorts, like, wow, look who's still involved in the industry. What are you doing? What are you doing? And every year they doubled the attendance, doubled and then doubled and doubled. And there were bankers everywhere, and there were, entrepreneurs from across the industry. Level 3 would never show up. Quest would never show up because they thought that was for the rest of us, I guess. But those were such fond memories, just the reconnecting.
I was at the first Metro Connect, Dan. It was a little bit before you and Zayo. It was in the Marriott Marquis in Miami, and there was 6 of us. We were all CEOs. It was like me. It was John Purcell. It was Mike Miller. It was, three other CEOs. We literally sat in the conference room at a round table with no program, no agenda, but just talked for a full day. We went out for a nice dinner, came back and talked half the next day, and that was Metro Connect 1. There was a representative from Capacity sitting in a chair outside the door, making sure we weren't disturbed.
And how did that come about? How did that Metro Connect 1?
Capacity wanted to start this event, and they went on a marketing spree trying to get CEOs to come. I bit, John Purcell bit, Mike Miller bit. So I knew those guys. I said, fine, I'll go. And And we just had, it was one of those, deals where we talked to each other, and nothing would get out of the room. There would be no finance people there, no banking people there, nothing. And we did that. Like it was that way for the first 2 or 3 years. In Capacity got this bright idea that, well, maybe if we invite finance people, we can get them to pay for everything. So, there, that started the onslaught.
And what year was it when the first year? Do you have a memory of that?
I want to say it was like 2005 or 6.
Yeah, so I probably came for the first time, maybe 2008 would be my guess.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like right when we were starting Zayo, that was one of the first conferences that I went to, and I'm not even sure
where
why.
Where was it? Can you tell me what year it was? By where was it? At the Elon Hotel there?
Yeah.
It's probably around 2008.
Yes, around then. But that was a great gathering, and then they started the conference up here in Boulder, which I was trying to get my team to kind of, be the quote co-owners of that, and to this day, I'm like, why didn't you guys do that? We got help Colby set that whole thing up, which is great. Want to do that in support of Colby, but also wanted to kind of, recognize we were a big part of setting it up. We were funding a lot of the first couple of years. We were kind of, getting people to show up, and, that was great, but, oh well.
So I have a good Colby story for you that you're responsible for, by the way. Colby covered AboveNet, obviously, and he and I had a great relationship. He was always pestering me to go on a marketing tour to where Cowan Strength was in the Midwest. So finally, I agreed. But my timing wasn't so great because I agreed in the middle of our merger negotiations. The merger happened, so I knew it was going to happen. I was meeting him on a Monday. On Thursday, I said to my general counsel, I'm going to call Colby and cancel. He says, no, you can't. We're a public company. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, that might be inside information. He might take something illegal out of that. So I said, you're kidding, right? I'm going to call him and say I'm sick or something. He goes, no, you can't call him. So we do our merger. It gets announced at 8:00 on a Monday morning. At 8:01, I'm on the phone to Colby. He goes, hey, Bill, how are you? Where are you? I'm at the airport. I go, Colby, I sold the company. There was this silence for about 30 seconds. He goes, oh, okay. Thanks, Bill. And he had to cancel the whole tour he put together for me.
Well, I think we collectively helped Colby's career a lot. Colby helped Colby's career a lot too, but I think Colby became kind of, I don't know, almost like someone who was embracing what the change that was going on in the industry, and we all kind of liked him and gave him access to insight or whatever, and he fully took advantage of that and created a name for himself and a brand for himself. The other guy who was, I think, a younger kid back then too, who I think did just great work, was Nick at Moffitt, Nathaniel's son, if I'm is that correct?
I didn't know him that well. I mean, I knew Colby well. I knew Breen. I knew Shilkara, Jennifer Fritzky. I mean, those are the people I talked to most.
What I'd liked about Nick, 'cause I didn't talk to Nick that much either, but the thoroughness of his analyses that he would do, it felt different than everyone else. Kind of regurgitated, their revenue growth was 3% and there's such as that. But those guys would go in and do pieces on industry.
It does great work. I read a lot of their stuff. They're a very good firm.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do, obviously our paths crossed as you guys were going through a take private process. I tell the story, at least from my vantage point, but a lot of that, was documented because we're public companies.
Yeah.
To document a lot of stuff. So it helps with the memory. But the shocking thing to me when we found out after the fact was how close you guys were to being sold it to private equity, both, before we were even able to have the money to make a serious attempt. And then as we were approaching you and that's just, it's so amazing. I mean, I'm hoping people who kind of get a chance to kind of pick up the book and read it, who are younger in their career, it exposes them to so much of what can happen, particularly in environments like we're in right now with what's going on with AI and the data center build outs and all the things around that. There's going to be a lot of noise in the system. The world's certainly different now than it was 10 years ago. A lot of noise in the system, both in the upswing, but then assuming things do get ahead of themselves, which I think is a safe assumption, there's going to be even more opportunity afterwards for those who are ready for it. So I'm on a quest to try to get a bunch of liquidity so that when this next bust cycle hits, can put that money to work.
Yeah.
On interesting things, because it's going to be there again soon.
I agree with that assessment, Dan. I think that the opportunity is on the upper side of the curve. It's a little bit on the downward side of the curve when people forget that they need cash to run their business.
Yeah, about it, because the companies are making huge commitments, not like we were making huge commitments years ago. And you have to, if you want to be a player, you can't use the techniques that we had to use after the meltdown. You can't be like, well, I'm only going to make an investment decision if there's clarity of payback. Well, if you want to play in this AI world right now, whether on the infrastructure side or really any part of AI, you don't have the luxury of saying there needs to be clarity and payback. You have to use your intuition, your gut. And, those who do that and choose wisely are going to, prosper. A lot of them are going to do that. And, and in hindsight, not have made great choices, and they're going to lose a whole bunch of money. That's just the way things are during a boom cycle. The only way to avoid that is
they're also going to lose sight of something important, Dan, which is I think they'll lose sight of the fact that you still have to pay attention to the enterprise customer and what they want. And yes, it's great to be involved in hyperscale learning centers and inference centers and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the longevity is going to be if you have a great relationship with the enterprise customers who are using all this stuff and can service their needs.
Yeah, which is hard to figure out when you're going through such a traumatic change. It's happening today. It'd be like in the earliest days of the internet, when we all start seeing the internet, for us to have anticipated what would happen 10 years afterwards. And, maybe, I think a few people would claim that they did. I'm not sure they really did. They guessed that, hey, the world's going to need search engines, or the world's going to need, online buying of stuff. Let me start with a bookstore. So they certainly had good insights that they acted upon, but I don't think they were able to see 10 years, into the internet. Just like if you're like trying to look 10 years post AI, I spend a lot of time in the quantum world right now as well, and in the space tech world. And neither one of those is booming like AI, but they're both going to boom like AI. Quantum certainly is going to change everything, and that's going to create kind of a dynamic that could lead to a boom, particularly when matched up with AI. And I think everyone is underestimating the intensity of what's going on in the space economy right now. Colorado's a hotspot for them. There's dozens and dozens of not just startups, but scale-ups that are, achieving significant milestones all across Colorado. And we're one of maybe 5 geographies that's doing that. So there is a lot going on right now for those who are early in their career or for those who are investing that feels a lot like, the late 1990s.
Yeah, I think that's a good parallel. I think that we are going through that cycle. I think that at the end of the day, I think you mentioned this a couple of times, that as great as these ideas are, you still need cash to run your business. So you better be cognizant of where your cash is and how you're spending it, and when you're going to get a return on it.
Yeah, no, and for those entrepreneurs who are earlier in their career, I guess you could say it sort of worked for me, but in hindsight, it was unnecessary risk by a lot. I didn't really, for whatever sort of reasons, I didn't really have trusted mentors that were with me for durations of time that I could really lean on, maybe in part because we were all going through the same thing at the same time. So, we couldn't really mentor each other per se. But I think, for those going through the experiences of scaling up companies, raising a bunch of money, trying to anticipate where to invest it. Man, find people around you who've been there and done that, and take advantage of where they might be able to, help you in your journey. Because I certainly, in hindsight, could have used that.
I was pretty fortunate to have two guys on my board that gave me a little bit of mentorship there. One of them was that guy I mentioned before, Stu Subotnick. He was Mr. Kluge's lieutenant there, and Stu was very smart and spent a lot of time with me on financial mentoring. And you remember Rich Postma from U.S. Signal?
No, I don't.
Rich Postma was a chairman of U.S. Signal. He was the owner of U.S. Signal as well. See, both those guys were on the board, and they were very patient and spent a lot of time. I'll tell you a real quick funny story. During the bankruptcy proceedings, I was at this one meeting where they called me in to, in case anybody wanted to know what was down a manhole, right? And actually, nobody did want to know what was down a manhole because they were all too busy talking about debt and, who gets what. And I sat there quietly just listening and listened. And when the meeting was over, Stu called me in his office and said, "How, Bill, did you learn anything there?" And I said, Stu, I know we have a lot of debt, but who is this guy, Pari Passu? He seems to have a lot of it. That's what Stu did too. He cracked up. He goes, "Well, let me tell you about Pari Passu." And so that was one of my learning points of the bankruptcy. I now know what Pari Passu is.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of example story, but it is so true that having gone through all the experience we went through, but doing it when there was so much going on, you couldn't really understand a lot of this stuff a lot of the time. Like, when I was going back to Carl Icahn's maneuvering relative to XO, I'm like, man, I wish I would have known all that stuff, 15 years ago, because I would have done this differently and I'd have done that differently. But he probably, at that point, he was probably, somewhere around 7 years old and probably has been through these experiences many times. But there's so much that if you knew kind of how debt worked and how raising capital worked and what it really meant to run a public company, if you kind of knew that before you had to grind your way through it, you'd have been much better at it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah. No, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Hindsight 2020.
Well, Bill, this has been such a pleasure, and getting to know you over the years across the industry. You've always been one of the, I think, most important people in the industry, but also one of the most respected people in the industry for lots and lots of years. And, you, like me, you got to start at, in the military, but start your post-military career in the Bell system, kind of go through a set of experiences where it's kind of bouncing around between this and that and seeing characters and learning from them and navigating through it, coming out the other end, being able to look backwards and say, man, that was quite the journey. And I'm sure you feel the same way, glad to have been part of it. So it's been good to see our paths intersect, and great to see and catch up with you right now.
It's been fun, Dan. It's been fun catching up here. It was fun reading through your book, which will be available to people soon, I guess. It brings back a lot of memories. It's a very well done book. I'm going to be advocating that my circle of friends take a copy and spend some reading it. It'll bring back some great memories about what we've all been through. I appreciate your friendship as well, and hope we can stay in touch more frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should add, one of the things that drove me, there's a few things that drove me to write the book, but one of the biggest ones was all these experiences we collectively went through and our industry went through. Pockets of it were written here and there, but most of it was not. I mean, the arc of the big story was never captured. And so many of us put blood, sweat, tears. We made a lot of money. We lost a lot of money. Some, maybe made some back in the end, but we all kind of went through this, and our paths crossed, intersected, collided. Yet the big story kind of was getting lost really quickly.
Yeah.
So, I figured let's just grind.
Now we have a reference, right? The reference is going to be your book. I'm betting a lot of people will keep it handy, and as you're reading through it, you'll get a lot of, oh yes, and I remember that, and oh my gosh, and all that kind of stuff. So best of luck with it, but I'm sure you won't need it.
And I hope, I'm trusting that the version 2 of the book, the version 2 meaning fine tuning it with the benefit of, people having read it and tell me their stories. And, I'm hoping, I think the whole thing is very accurate, but it was hard to piece together all these stories. So there's gaps in accuracy, no doubt. So I'm hoping people read it and say, okay, here, let me tell you what really happened there behind the scenes.
You mean, Dan, when you kicked my ass buying 360 networks?
Well, that was only because we were at the finish line before you almost got there.
Yeah, that was when I read that, I said, oh yeah, like just so people know, we were both going after the same company. At that point in time, how many acquisitions have you made?
Yeah, we were up there. By that point, we were up to, I don't know, probably 20,
20,
there. But also,
Bill LaPerch was at 0. And Bill LaPerch and AboveNet was at 0, but I really thought 360 would help. And so I think our bids were pretty close. When I found that out, I tried to up the bid, and Greg Maffei, who owned 360, said, Bill, you're a great guy. You have a great company. You're doing really well. But Dan Caruso's done 20 acquisitions. And I'm pretty sure he can get this one done pretty quick too. So there it goes.
I have that to thank Greg for. And Greg has, I have a house in Cabo at this place called El Dorado, and Greg Maffei has a house there as well. In fact, Steve Smith is there as well. So I always look at Greg Maffei's house. I'm like, I wonder if you use some of that money you made on 360 right now.
Well,
good deal.
By the way, I'm out here in Montauk, New York, as I said to start off, and clearly, the place I have out here is as a result of the good fortune that I had with Zayo buying AboveNet.
Yeah, or said more accurately, what you earned by doing such a good job on AboveNet and making it a very valuable company. So,
well, thank you very much. But I'll go back to what I said initially. It was a we job, not an I job.
Yeah, for certain. We, the industry too. I mean, all of us, even the ones, who, didn't succeed at the end of the day. I mean, everyone contributed. Some, did bad things. I'm not excusing that, but most people, even in stories that didn't end up as well, most gave their hearts, their souls, their blood, sweat, and tears to build the industry. So it's something we all should be proud of. Yep. Great. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, Dan, great seeing you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg with support from Courtney Caruso, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.